Hello, all. Thank you for joining the Human Libraries of Procurement podcast. We call it Human Libraries of Procurement because of three main elements: the human connect, the libraries part, which is for wisdom and knowledge, and procurement because we talk about procurement. So, one such Human Libraries of Procurement is Samit Shankar. Thank you so much for joining. Uh, if you would please start with introduction for yourself, and then we go from there.
My name is Samit. Really pleasure to be part of this podcast. I'm based out of Bangalore in India. I've been part of procurement organization for over 20 years, but overall come with more than 25 years of experience. Um, Started my career, which you guys may not believe, but started with hospitality. So I was part of the very first uh, six-star hotel. Nowadays that's become quite common in the world. But when I started 25 years back in India, that was quite an experience. Uber luxury, etc. And honestly, I got a taste of early procurement there but I was part of the front desk, really looking after guest relations, and kind of really saw a very first flavor of customer services and how you need to excel in that. So that was a really good foundation. However, I took a swift change in career. It was the dot-com boom timeframe in the around the 2000. So I did a career turn. I was fascinated by technology. So I did a break. I took a break and actually did a few courses and actually started to do coding. And that's where I got my first flavor of technology, building websites, building portals for certain organizations. So that was my first experience on the technology side, and continued my career there on technology. From coding, I moved to infrastructure build, building and maintaining servers, networks, etc. And did that for a few years. I was part of a few organizations like Emphasis, which was a third-party organization, and then subsequently with Allianz Insurance, which is a German insurance major. And then that's where I got a taste of procurement, because one of the things which we used to do was create POs and SOWs. And that's, a function which came to my team to build for the entire organization. So that was a very, very interesting experience. And my first exposure to procurement, one of the functions within procurement. And then subsequent to that, I moved to G Capital, which was primarily a hub and spoke model, with the hub being the capital project management function, and the spoke being the managed services organizations like Wipro and TCS, etc., which were delivering technology back to G Capital as an organization. So really understanding how to manage third parties, and really getting a flavor of how to optimize services, how to bring value back to the organization by delivering more on the Lean Six Sigma concept, which was a very GE thing. I really got an exposure to that there. And another area which was very interesting was software asset management. So this was a function which I kind of inherited, and started to look at licensing and optimization of licensing. So this is really something which solidified my exposure into procurement. And subsequent to that, my largest stint has been with JP Morgan, which is based out of a place called Hyderabad in India. I was roped in to kind of build the Asia Pacific vendor management function, managing suppliers. Initially, the managed services suppliers, very similar to what I did with G Capital, but subsequently all technology suppliers in the Asia Pacific region. Within JP Morgan, then I moved to third party risk management. Now, this was a fairly new concept at that point of time. But being a bank, they were mandated under the OCC guidelines to really manage their key suppliers, which handle data. So the third-party risk management framework is something which I started to work on along with some of my leaders, and built a team in India, which was about 200 people strong eventually, which helped the assurance of what third parties deliver to the organization. After doing all of that, um, I got an opportunity to work with Diageo, which is a UK-based alcobev organization. They were looking for somebody who would kind of string all of these together for them. So while
Right.
procurement was obviously existing as a function, but they did not have a very strong or almost non-existent SRM function. So I was kind of invited in to kind of build that for them along with the third-party risk management function. So really worked with them, first maturing these functions within the procurement organization, and then subsequently kind of optimizing it. And I'll give you a few examples as we go along. My last organization came knocking, which is the Ernst& Young. Because it's a partnership, every region is different. Every region's, you can say, governance is different. So there wasn't a single thread across the entire organization which could actually take the benefit of volumes of scale, or where you would have processes and tools which could be leveraged. So when I came into EY to kind of lead the global SRM function, the idea was to see how we can, look at 40,000 suppliers, which is the list of suppliers which exists in EY, and kind of do the classification of them from a risk perspective, from a strategic perspective, and really try to kind of put together a maturity model of governance. And that's what I did over, I guess the initial 2 years in EY, by building and maturing the SRM function. And then after that, I started to take on a lot of transformation work within EY to look at integrating procurement, SRM, the accounts payable function, finance, legal, third-party risk, etc. Putting all of these guys together, and also really bringing the regions much more closer to what we would call a standardized governance model for EY suppliers. So that's kind of been my journey so far.
I think you touched on SRM, you touched on the AI part as well in the introduction. We'll get to that. First, the disclaimer part. We're going to talk about a lot of our past experience. Samit will talk about a lot of companies, but we are generally here on our own capacity. We are not representing any company. So that's the disclaimer that I wanted to put it out there. The other thing that I wanted to say is, if anybody has any question, please put it on the chat. I would be very happy to read it out to Samit, and then Samit can answer that. Right. Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Lots of good experience there. Well done. We'll start with one of the podcasts that I've heard about yours, where you talk about savings, and procurement talks about a lot of savings. Would you like to talk about that, and when we go for SRM and all the other good topics that are there? So we start with the cost savings and procurement, and what are your views on that?
Right. So, it's I would say that procurement as an organization, certainly kind of does the heavy lifting when it comes to negotiating contracts and driving the savings in the organization for the organization. But I feel that in using a lot of that data, and I think that's where the opportunity exists of kind of working very closely with SRM. And honestly speaking, a lot of the organizations I engage with, or we have our consulting arm deal with, don't have a very mature SRM function. So, overall, when it comes to procurement savings, we've got those, things which you can negotiate from a price point perspective, or looking at historical data, see the trends of utilization and how to use that data to kind of look at how future contracts can be modified and negotiated. But what I feel is that any organization which is kind of reaching a $10 billion threshold should start to think about having an dedicated SRM function, and it's like kind of unfair to have procurement kind of do that role as a procurement person and also double hat as an SRM function. So I think that the motivations are very different, and I think where I have seen and what I've been able to kind of build is a very good you can say a joint in the hip kind of methodology with the procurement and SRM, so that the true value of what SRM and procurement delivers back to the organization, is really visible when these two organizations work in tandem. And I'll kind of give you a few examples here, right? So, whenever we come to renewals, procurement is kind of always caught at the end of that renewal cycle, where the business is kind of pushing
Right.
them to go ahead and renew. But procurement, needs its own time to actually
Right.
do its due diligence and understand utilization, understand customer feedback from the business, to really see whether it's going to be a renewal and negotiation or it's going to be an RFP. So
Right.
what I've seen SRM really help there is because SRM is there through the life cycle of the contract. They're able to, provide procurement with a lot of insights of, when it comes to performance, when it comes to commercial adherence to rate cards negotiated, when it comes to, volume discounting and invoice errors, etc., which sometimes the suppliers tend to kind of can are guilty of doing, right? So with all of that information and feedback from the business on the performance of the supplier, and also in outside engage, understanding of what the market is doing, all of the data can be collated together and presented back to the procurement organization, which can then consume this data to kind of create that procurement strategy for negotiation with the supplier, whether it is for a renewal or for running an RFP. So I feel that this kind of working together is something which a lot of organizations kind of miss, and SRM can actually help procurement really get ahead of the game when it comes to negotiating contracts with data and facts, and use that to their advantage.
I think we'll start with the SRM. Tell us your general view on SRM, and then we go into more details about how SRM can benefit organization and all that. So, general views, why it is not seen as much as it should be seen.
No, absolutely. SRM as a function, as I said, is more and more becoming critical to the entire supply chain delivery.
Right.
And I feel that the reason it's not really come into prominence just yet, or in certain organizations, of course, there are various levels of maturity there, but in most organizations I've kind of engaged with, SRM is more considered a tactical function, which is like,
Right.
what, once the contract is signed, go ahead and, work with the business to see how the supplier is performing, and do regular reviews with the supplier along with the business. And a lot of these activities tend to be very tactical, right? And I feel that because of that very nature of being tactical historically, SRM tends to get, it doesn't come into the limelight too much, because businesses say, hey, you know what, the inputs which I'm receiving, or the facilitation role that SRM is taking, is something which is not something which I couldn't have done it myself. It's just that I feel that, yes, this is a helping hand for me, right? So, but it's not something which is strategic for the business or for procurement. And that's what I've been, really focusing on changing, is because once you start moving to data and insights, and when you start moving into the true value of what SRM can deliver, it becomes a lot more closer to the business, because then they kind of feel that, yes, SRM is a function I can really bank on. And, what they provide back to me as a service is very valuable. And the same thing really goes for the supplier as well. I mean, again, remember that SRM sits between the parent organization and the supplier. And while obviously
Right.
they're part of the parent organization, but one crucial function of SRM is also to look out for the interest of the supplier. And sometimes, and again, my personal experience has been that when you do that, when you start to understand why a supplier is, let's say, falling behind in payments, or sorry, falling behind in being able to give their invoices, or
Right.
not being paid on time, or their performance is faltering, or what they have by way of their individual supply chain, which could be fourth party, fifth party, etc., how they are getting impacted, due to which they're not able to service the parent organization well. It's kind of, helping and understanding their perspective sometimes, to really see how you can, make the whole situation better. And I'll give you a few examples, right? Again, so this is like real-time examples which I have experienced in pretty much all my organizations, whether it is EY or Diageo. And and the pain area which a lot of suppliers feel is, hey, I'm not getting paid on time. And
Right.
and it could be because of various reasons, right? So they're the ones who are knocking on the door of SRM and saying, hey, can you do something about it? Or they're talking to the business stakeholder and saying, I've not been able to pay on time. How do you expect me to negotiate in your favor if the very basic of me getting paid on time does not fulfill? And this is where SRM can really play a role in supporting uh, the supplier, because what SRM can really do, and this is something which I've done, is understanding the entire life cycle of the invoice and seeing, where does it go from invoice to, the AP systems. And, we have the finance teams involved, we have the business stakeholders involved who approve various things along the way. And as they approve things along the way, sometimes, the ball gets dropped. And as things get dropped, the invoices get stuck in people's mailboxes, on SAP systems. And the whole thing kind of snowballs into a lot of delayed invoices. And the supplier gets very frustrated because they're not getting paid on time. So when it comes to renewal stage and procurement comes and says, hey, give us a better discount, they really play hardball, and they say, you know what, I don't think that's a
Right.
good idea. I don't think you guys have been a good, client or customer to us. So, I have actually, done a bunch of workshops within the organization, and really kind of did a value stream mapping of the entire life cycle of invoices, seeing where things are stuck. And if it is something which is with finance, then really kind of got deeper into understanding what is it that the finance needs to kind of make sure that the supplier is being paid on time. Or if it is with the business stakeholders, then what is it that they need to approve an invoice? So it's been a combination of behavioral aspects, and technology
Right.
aspects, because when it comes to behavioral, sometimes people just kind of forget, and this is not on their list of priority. So kind of rehashing that and ensuring that, people understand, whether it is through nudging or negotiating or escalating, and making them feel that, what, we need to be more responsible in approving invoices. Or it could be a technology issue, and I've seen that with SAP quite a bit, where
Right.
things are sitting in various queues, and they get ping-ponged between various other teams, and just the invoices get stuck. So kind of getting to the root cause of what's causing that delay, and then working with that team and understanding how can technology be better, can be made better, and creating. In one case, I had actually created a mini help desk, right, which was which helped in kind of kicking the invoices along the way, so that the people who were responsible for approvals or checking to see whether the budgets were there for it to be approved, did that in their fashion, in the right fashion. Or it could be a technology thing, because invoices come in various shapes and sizes and formats, and sometimes they're not very compatible with what SAP has in their system. So the data OCR reading is not sometimes accurate, and it kind of throws in all kind of wrong numbers. So improving on the technology aspect by working with various teams, with the technology teams or with SAP directly, to help make that whole process better.
Right. So Samit, I'll just expand on that you said about the invoicing. And I remember that when I started off, I had a similar project with one of my big suppliers, and they had a huge spend, and we did invoice kind of problem solving for them, and that helps a lot when the supplier comes to you, and his whatever he has to say about the invoice, right? It is getting solved. That increases the trust between the procurement and supplier, which is huge. And that also gets into the point that you start to negotiate better. He's also
Mhm.
willing to listen to you when you are in trouble, or when you are asking for certain things. So that has worked for me when I have seen it. um, and I have a comment from Alex in the chat. He says, being the customer of choice is a behavioral choice. So that's a fair point as well. Yes, Samit, if you would like to go on, you were trying to say something.
Sure.
Yeah,
Yeah. Now, the other area which I think SRM can play a very strategic role in really making sure that the contractual obligations and terms are really met, and I'll explain that
right.
a bit better.
Mm,
So when it comes to procurement, they really do a great job in negotiating the contract and bringing in the maximum value by way of rate cards, by way of implementing discounting
right,
structures, and penalties and all of those things, which kind of are there to make sure that the supplier is doing what they should be doing in their best possible capacity. But what happens is, and this is something which even Gartner has said, that once a supplier contract is signed, and if it is not managed well, it kind of loses 75% of its value. And what
right,
that really means is that, and this is practical stuff I'm telling you, right? Contingent worker suppliers I've seen, or managed services where there's a lot of change management happening, the rate cards really take a beating, in the sense that if you have a supplier which has negotiated rates for resources across various regions, or the skills and experience, etc. So you've got kind of that matrix going, which tends to make which the procurement tends to negotiate with the supplier and say, if somebody's based out of London, this is the rate card for them. Somebody's based out of
right,
Mumbai, that's the rate card. The Philippines, that's the rate card, etc. But what very quickly happens, and this is happens a lot in professional services organizations like EY, is that suppliers tend to play a little game, right? So what they do
right,
is that they because they understand that the business needs resourcing at a certain frequency, and sometimes they need them quite urgently. What they do is they say that we're not going to stick to the rate card, and we're going to actually offer you a resource at X% above the rate card. And
right,
because the business is caught in a bit of a bind, where they need the resource to start by a particular date, or they need him for a project, or a client engagement, they generally agree to that rate card. And this is something which, if you don't really do any checks on it, the kind of, you can say that the supplier kind of gets a free hand at it. But as SRM, one of the things which I've done is really keep a tab of what are the rates at which resources are brought into the program, and also look at rate card adherence. So what I've done is, and recommended a lot of my contracts, is there is going to be a percentage of rate card adherence which has to be agreed with the supplier, and in case that a rate card is not adhered to, then there has to be some kind of penalty mechanism baked into the contract. So from in certain suppliers, I've seen what, like, at 80% non-adherence to the rate card. And when we started to put this penalty into the contract at the next renewal, that percentage improved significantly. Noticed is that sometimes it's not the supplier's fault. The business comes in with a requirement, you can say
Right.
last minute,
Yes.
and therefore you have no option but to kind of pull resources out of other projects to be able to service this client or this particular business, and therefore there is a premium associated with it. So one really important thing which I work with procurement on is to see how we can do this predictive pipelining of skills.
Right. I think very very right point. A rate card is only as good as it is being implemented, and I think we negotiate a lot. What you said is correct, and
Right.
later on we just forget because we have other problems to solve. So we just move from one project to another project, and that has been a classical problem with procurement. I think that follow-up mechanism should be there. The reporting should be there, and it should have those control mechanisms, as you said. Um,
Right.
right. So I just wanted to move on. You gave two examples of SRM projects. Are there any other success stories that you would like to share?
Absolutely. Again, this all depends on a lot of data, right? So, again, using analytics, and I've got like a dedicated set of folks who look after analytics within my team. I'll give you a few examples of where we've looked at, um, improving utilization numbers. So one very classic case, and I'm sure a lot of people are aware of, but sometimes they don't really get implemented, is in software licensing. A lot of work is done, or people do a lot of contracts. Organizations do a lot of contract with software licensing vendors or SaaS vendors, and you kind of buy the enterprise license, and kind of assume that they are being well utilized. The business is not so much focused on utilization as much, though of course it is one of their key metrics which get published in the QBRs, etc. But what happens is, because they are in they are in the business of delivering services, they sometimes may not be able to focus on that. So what SRM really does there is look at license utilization, work with the SAM team, if there is a SAM team, and see how well there is license harvesting happening and reuse and redeployment happening, and whether we are actually renewing the contract with lesser number, if that is what is actually getting utilized on the ground, so that you don't waste in buying more volumes, even though you may get potentially better discounting if you buy more volumes. But sometimes when you do the math, the lesser number of license which are being utilized are a better bet than buying an enterprise-wide license on all-you-can-eat kind of licensing with the provider or with the publisher, and then actually that kind of goes to waste. So that's one specific example. I can give a few more examples. One is so within JP Morgan, as an example, we used to work with a supplier which used to give anniversary gifts. So you built a catalog of gifts which our employees could choose based on their anniversary, and be able to choose that, and that gets home delivered from this particular supplier, right? And this is a
Right.
global contract that we had with that supplier. Um, and doing analysis of that, what we realized is that particular gift was sometimes two times or three times its street value. And the way we did that analysis was kind of scrape data from Amazons and Walmarts of the world, and look at pricing advertised there, and then look at the pricing of that, which the supplier is kind of sharing with us, that this is what it costs plus freight, right? So this is not visible to the employer for obvious reasons. This is more for the organization to manage. But when you have an organization which has got 300,000, 400,000 people,
Right.
that's a lot of volume you're dealing with, right? So
Mhm.
so what we came back with is that analysis saying that, what, looking at the fast moving items, it's, the street price of this is X, and you're giving it as, either 2X or a certain percentage above X, which I think is quite unfair to the organization. So when we did our QBR and eventually the contract renewal, um, we kind of brought all of this into showcase with the supplier and said, you guys are not being fair to the organization. How can you improve your catalog and make the prices more current and more in line with, say, an Amazon or one of these providers or bulk providers, so where we can get the best value. So it was a bit of a back and forth with the supplier, but eventually what they agreed was that they would not go at any given point of time above, say, 10 or 15% over the fair market price of that particular product. And in certain cases, if they did, and we were able to identify that they would be able to kind of scale the price back or give us a rebate accordingly. So again, this is something which, when you talk volumes, you start to talk multi-millions here, right? So we were able to kind of
Right.
save a few $1 million just because we were monitoring this particular element. And in another situation, this is more on the insurance side. As you know, a lot of organizations pay for the premiums for insurance, whether it is medical insurance, life insurance of our employees in various geographies. But again, with organizations like professional service organizations and consulting organizations, there is a lot of churn. And you have people joining and then leaving mid-year, or within a few months, or whenever, right? So there is always a certain percentage of churn in the organization. So what
Right.
used to historically happen is that uh, you would have an insurance which was premium, which was set based on levels and seniority and all that kind of stuff, and inclusions uh, at the beginning of the year, and the organization would pay for that insurance premium at the beginning of the year for the entire year.
Right.
So when we looked at the data of employees who were churning out and new employees churning in, what we realized is that there is always this 25% of 25 to 30% of churn, which is happening in any fiscal year. So what we agreed to do with as a test with one of the regions insurance provider was that why don't we pay you the premium in 4 installments every quarter? So we would take a check of the number of employees which existed in that particular quarter, and then pay you the premium for the upcoming quarter um, that at that time. And then depending on live data of employees in our system, we would calculate along with yourselves on what that premium would look like, and we kind of pay you out then. So that took care of a little bit of employees who kind of left after the first quarter. So in the second quarter, we didn't have to pay for their premium, because it was obviously prorated
Right.
by quarter. So what happened in this situation is that we did not end up paying whether, the premium for people who kind of left the organization, and for the entire year, we actually started to kind of pay them for quarter in which they existed, or the start of the quarter they existed in the system. So this helped us save a little bit of money. Again, the point being, uh, because SRM should be looking at how business is run and what is critical to the business, and using that as a metric to evaluate whether we're getting the best value from the contract. That is the true strategic role of SRM. Otherwise, what happens is, if you're just doing the regular stuff, which is just keeping a tab of everything, you really are not going to be, you can say, the favorite cousin, right? So you are going to be kind of always, uh, kind of working in the shadows. So the value SRM needs to bring is to procurement by looking at analysis and doing that before a contract is getting renewed, and helping nudge the business that, what, we are 6 months, before the contract ends. You guys need to start working with procurement and make sure that either the contract is renewed or we look for replacement, and provide them with a lot of data of what is important, which would be useful during the negotiation phase with the supplier. And also an area which I think, SRM can play a very, very crucial role is in performance management. So what happens is, when contracts are originally signed, sometimes we don't have a history of, the SLAs and KPIs and, matrices, etc. And because SRM kind of tracks that, they can do a sense check, right? If the SLA is all green, but the feedback because of the CSATs that we're doing with the business of the supplier is all negative or relatively antagonistic. So what is that is causing this? Why is it that even though they're meeting all the SLAs, the business is not happy? So is that something which is the way the delivery is being delivered, or are the SLAs not tightened enough, or are we looking at wrong matrices which are being measured in the contract, or do we even have SLAs in the contract? So one thing which SRM can really contribute towards is having what we call SLA repository. So what we've done is looked at each category and subcategory of service, and looked at what is best in class when it comes to measurement of SLAs in that subcategory, make that into what we call a playbook, and at the end the at the renewal of a contract, irrespective of geography, as long as it fits that particular subcategory, make sure that those same SLAs get implemented as much as possible, as far as possible, within those contracts. So one advantage that gives us is our ability to kind of see suppliers, apple to apple and not apple to oranges, because we're measuring the same thing, and be able to kind of judge which supplier is doing better, which region is doing better, what is it that the region is doing, which another region can actually learn from.
Thing I'll remember it for a long time is the insurance one. Every time, every year that I do insurance, I have the same thinking that why don't we do it quarterly? Why do we have to do a yearly premium? And every time I just shut myself off that, it's just one time I'm doing this insurance, so we'll think about it next year. But I think next year when I'm doing it, I would think about it. So that's a good learning for me as well. Um, now that now that we have established SRM, I want to ask a very basic question, right?
Sure.
That procurement and SRM, most places procurement is actually SRM. I mean, they think that SRM is part of procurement, which is correct. In a way, procurement and SRM are very similar, but they are not exactly the same thing. So would you like to explain as to how procurement and SRM are different from each other? I think it's a
Sure.
very basic question, but I had to ask that question.
Sure. The motivations are slightly different, right? Because you can say that the procurement organization is forward-looking. The procurement organization is looking at how to negotiate contracts for the future, and look at the market and see who the players are, how the technology or services are kind of transforming and changing, and whether the organization is is benefiting from that change in the market. They're looking at Gartners and doing those analysis, etc., to see who are the market leaders and what is it that is differentiating those suppliers, and whether those differentiators are actually being incorporated into the new contract. So they're kind of negotiating in a very forward-looking manner. The SRM function really comes into play once the ink dries on that paper, or virtual paper nowadays, and starts to monitor and manage the contract and keeps the supplier honest on what they have signed up for. And that, I think, is the most critical factor of what SRM is. Both are part of the same organization. I fundamentally believe that the procurement categories and the SRM should report into the CPO the way, to make sure that, they're kind of brothers in arms. But, their motivations are slightly different. And it's basically to make sure that whatever procurement has negotiated, that actually is getting delivered, and those values are actually getting, realized, right? So fundamentally, that's what the difference is. But on the plus side, SRM also looks at, risk. So if you look at third-party risk or data privacy, etc., what SRM is supposed to also do is keep a tab of, is at the time of contracting, let's say, the information security team has highlighted some gaps in the supplier's environment or delivery. What happens is that without SRM, it kind of disappears. Nobody looks at it anymore, right? Let's say the supplier has agreed to make certain systematic changes to plug those gaps which the information security team or data privacy team has highlighted. But there is generally, I've seen, no one really actively looking at that. So with the SRM team being there, what they get passed down is this list of gaps. And, the gaps could be critical, medium, and, criticality, or lower criticality, depending on, how it's been classified. But they are, in my view, responsible to make sure that the supplier who have committed to certain dates, for remediation, actually meet those dates. And if they haven't met those dates, they get flagged off in a QBR environment or any kind of review, or in many cases, suppliers do tend to send out a CSAT, back to the business and to SRM saying, how are we doing? Are we actually meeting your requirements, etc. So that's where, these things can be flagged off, or during renewal, saying that, what, you committed to doing so and so things to improve your environment from a data security perspective, but you didn't do it, and you put us at risk. ESG, framework or goals which the organization has signed up to, and are they actually playing, a supporting role there to make sure that the organization also meets those goals? So a supplier and the entire supply chain, should be held accountable for that. And the way to kind of manage it again is through SRM. Again, and a lot of people will say, what, there is an ESG department or a function which looks at this area. Fair enough, there is, and a lot of organizations that do exist. But where do they all get stitched together into a dashboard, which the business can see, which has got all these components in it, like a balanced scorecard? That's something which SRM maintains. And that is something which I think is super useful when it comes to management of that supplier ecosystem. Similarly, I feel that the forward-looking element, and I'll give you a few examples here. I worked with large software companies like the Microsoft, SAPs of the world, and working with, say, in Diageo, which was a CPG firm. The product which are tailored towards this organization or CPG as an industry can be slightly different from, say, a professional services firm, or an oil and gas organization, etc. So by working on that relationship with the supplier, making sure that there is representation of the CPG interests in future product releases, or customization of that product for future releases, and having like a voice of the customer or customer. Uh, Sometimes these guys have forums where customers are invited into their future product strategy. Having representation by the organization there, is super important, because then and again, you guys must have seen, right? The S4 HANA rollouts tend to be disasters in many cases, because the organization, SAP, has made that whole rollout very complex. And looking at that implementation of S4 HANA into the organization, which is already running a previous version, can sometimes fail. And many a times I've seen many examples where it's failed. Because they have not been sensitive to what the needs of the industry or that particular industry is.
Right. I have a comment in the chat from Harold. Harold
Mhm.
says agreements, SLS, need to be written down. However, you can't agree on the future situation which isn't covered. The intent to support and bring solutions or services when needed is also critical. So that's a good comment there.
So
Right.
yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with the comment. I'm not kind of saying anything different, but it's just more of showing that yes, this is more this is more collaboration, and not an antagonizing kind of a relationship, right? So
Right.
that's where I feel we need, SRM again plays a big role there.
Right. I want to take another two questions. We're a little short on time, but I think we'll go on. The first question that I want to take is uh, about AI and SRM. I think you touched on that, but AI would change SRM in a big way as well, add value.
Mhm.
Right? What are your views? What kind of future you see with AI and SRM?
I'll give you a very interesting example, because I did use this. I did use AI last year, in my last organization, which is so, as you may be aware, right? So EY at one point went through what we call Project Everest, and the objective of that was to kind of split the organization into two different legal entities. One legal entity was focused on consulting, that would be a public entity. And then we have the traditional business of tax and audit, et cetera, which would be the, what we call the existing organization, right? So they would kind of split up these two organizations into two. Now, how it ended up a failure or whatever is not is not the objective here. The objective was to see how technology and AI could be used in this situation. So what happened is that a lot of our contracts are written, depending on the business unit, or the legal well, not the legal entity, but the line of business which it services, right? And certain contracts are written in a way that they service all the lines of businesses, whether it is consulting, whether it's tax and insurance, or sorry, tax and audit, and what have you, and everything in the middle. So one very important element of that was to figure out how many contracts had novation clauses in them, and also to understand, whether a particular contract was signed to support audit, line of business, or consulting line of business, or tax line of business, etc. So what we did was, leveraging one of the AI tools, which exists in one of our CLM, applications that we have, and this was a brand new tool which was being introduced, kind of piloted within that organization. We kind of had all our contracts run through that AI tool to identify clauses in the contract, which would help us understand which lines of businesses this particular contract was supporting. or whether it was supporting everybody, right? So then using this particular tool, as part of procurement and SRM together as an entity, because this was kind of a fire drill, we were able to identify that these contracts are written in such a way that they service everybody, or they service a particular side of the business. And we needed to kind of, when we split the organization, they would fall into either one side of the business to legal entity or the other, or it would allow us to service both the legal entities, and we would be able to kind of, help either novate the contract or be able to service them and split them into two different contracts, etc. So that exercise was needed for us to be able to prepare for the eventual split of the organization. We did all of that homework. Unfortunately, the company didn't split, so that was a kind of a lost exercise.
Right.
But again, it helped us kind of gain the capability and understanding of how the AI can potentially be used to be able to uncover a lot of these elements, and be able to use it again. Is this as good as some of the new age agentic AI stuff which is coming about? I know obviously it was pretty rudimentary, but nevertheless it really helped us. But as I look at agentic AI, and I'm kind of working with a startup right now, which is in this space. Oh my God, the amount of stuff which they can do is quite very mind-boggling, right? I mean, um, invoice validation, and contract authoring. They do a lot of things. I mean, they can be programmed to do a lot of things. In many cases they self-learn and actually be able to do a good job of contract authoring and negotiation. It could all be automated in many ways, right? So it's a space which is very interesting. uh, Again, all of us need to kind of adapt and be aware that this is kind of coming our way. It's a question of, really finding the right use cases as to where AI and Gen AI and all these technologies are going to play a supporting role, or in certain cases, whatever is very well defined and a repeatable process, how they can kind of pretty much take that work all by themselves without any kind of human in the middle, right? So I think this is going to be the future, and I think we all need to kind
A
of bring.
question: any fresher who is listening to this, what would you say about SRM and procurement as a career?
Okay, so anybody new into the industry, procurement and SRM both, I think, are, I mean, they're not going anywhere. To be honest with you, procurement for sure is not going anywhere. They could be, you need to be more and more technologically savvy. You need to be able to see how tools can be utilized to do your job better, faster, potentially cheaper. But eventually, these organizations are not going anywhere. Yes, there would be consolidation because of technology again, new age technology, which is going to make sure that people do more higher value activities and not just the mundane stuff. Uh, that's one thing which I would suggest. SRM, as I said, they have they have the ability to add really, really interesting aspects and dimensions to what procurement delivers back to the parent business, and therefore should be an equal partner, both in the procurement desk, which is on the CPO's table, and also the business leaders table, right? So I've had the pleasure of sitting both with as a direct of the procurement leader, and also as a extended team of the business, because you need to be able to understand what the business is saying and doing and feeling, based on what the supplier is delivering, to be able to take that message back to the supplier and keep those suppliers honest. So it's really important for SRM to be more attuned to the business, as to what the service is being delivered. And procurement needs to be very, very outward focused. They need to really be very sharp to understand what's happening in the market, what those categories are doing, what is the latest innovation in that category, and how that can be brought back into the into the organization to drive the best value and give you a competitive advantage. And I feel that that's something which is going to be a true success factor for any new individual coming into these organizations and be successful as a procurement professional.
Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Samit, again for your time. Thank you for knowledge sharing. This has been a great session. If you have anything before we go off to say.
No, I just want to express my gratitude to the folks who dialed in. I know that these sessions can be long, but I do hope that I was able to kind of give a bit more, add a little bit value into your day and to your organization. And hopefully, as I say, organizations do well when they have strong team members, and the way to kind of be strong is when you are able to learn from other people's mistakes and experiences. I hope that I was able to contribute a little bit towards that today. So thank you, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, Samit, again, and have a nice day then. Bye-bye.
If you like this video, please like and subscribe to the channel.